Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the wildest revenge stories pulled straight from the chaotic heart of the internet. These are the stories that make you stop scrolling, lean back, and mutter, "No way," before immediately wanting more. The kind that make you gasp, laugh, cheer, and sometimes just sit there in stunned silence thinking, "Damn, that's cold." If you're new here, do yourself a favor and hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and settle in, because once you start binging stories like these, there's no going back. Karma, when it finally shows up, has a flair for the dramatic, and today's story might just be the cleanest, pettiest, most satisfying example of that you'll ever hear. Today we're talking about what many people consider the absolute gold standard of cheating revenge. A story that's been whispered about, reposted, retold, and mythologized across Reddit for years. You might know it as the shrimp in the curtain rod story. Some people call it the fish guts revenge. Others just call it legendary. However you label it, one thing is certain, it's a masterclass in patience, planning, and letting someone destroy themselves without you ever having to raise your voice. This isn't about screaming matches or public meltdowns. There's no courtroom theatrics, no viral confrontations, no dramatic slap scenes. This is quiet, surgical, long-term. The kind of revenge that doesn't explode all at once but slowly rots from the inside out, lingering long after the person thinks they've won. So buckle up, because this one is satisfying in a way that hits deep. The story goes like this. There was a woman, let's call her Sarah. Sarah had been married to her husband for over a decade. Not a whirlwind romance, not some short-lived thing. This was real life. Years of shared routines, inside jokes, holidays, school runs, and quiet evenings where nothing dramatic happened, and that was the point. They had kids together. They had a nice house. Not a mansion, not a dump, just a solid, comfortable home in a decent neighborhood. The kind of place that looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like from the outside, stable, safe, successful. To anyone watching from the street, they were doing fine. Better than fine, even. But Sarah started noticing the cracks long before anyone else did. It wasn't one big red flag. It was a collection of little things, each easy to explain away on its own. Late nights at work that used to be rare suddenly becoming routine. A phone that never left his hand, always face down, always locked. Passwords changing. Notifications muted. A sudden obsession with going to the gym when he'd never cared much before. New clothes. A new haircut. A new version of him that didn't quite feel like the man she married. When she asked about it, he laughed it off. Told her she was imagining things. Said she was paranoid. Accused her of being insecure. He reassured her just enough to make her doubt herself, but never enough to actually put her at ease. Classic gaslighting, though Sarah didn't have a neat word for it at the time. All she knew was that something felt wrong in her bones. Eventually, she confronted him directly. No yelling. No accusations. Just a simple, steady question. Was there someone else? He denied it. Calmly. Convincingly. Told her she was stressed, that she was projecting, that marriage was hard and everyone went through phases. He wrapped his lies in reason and concern, like he was the mature one trying to calm an irrational spouse. And for a moment, she almost believed him. Almost. But that feeling never went away. The unease lingered like background noise you can't quite tune out. So Sarah did something that took both courage and restraint. She didn't snoop. She didn't scream. She didn't explode. She hired a private investigator. It didn't take long. The proof came back clean and brutal. Photos. Dates. Times. A long-term affair with a coworker. Not a mistake. Not a drunken slip-up. A full-blown relationship with history and routine and inside jokes of its own. He'd built an entire second life while pretending the first one was intact. When Sarah confronted him this time, there was no denying it. The mask dropped. And with it, whatever was left of the marriage. He didn't beg. He didn't apologize in any meaningful way. Instead, he told her he wanted a divorce. He said he'd fallen in love. Said he deserved to be happy. Said things that sounded selfish and rehearsed, like he'd been practicing them in his head for months. The affair partner, now officially upgraded to mistress, was ready and waiting. What followed was ugly in the quiet, bureaucratic way divorces often are. During the settlement, he fought hard for the house. Claimed it was his since he earned more money. Since his name was more financially tied to it. Since, in his mind, he was the one really keeping things afloat. He wanted the house not just because it was valuable, but because it represented victory. Proof that he could cheat, leave, and still walk away with the biggest prize. Sarah was heartbroken. That part matters. She wasn't some emotionless chess grandmaster. She was devastated. She was grieving the life she thought she had. She was angry, humiliated, exhausted. But underneath all of that, she was still thinking. And that's where this story takes its turn. Sarah agreed to let him have the house. No screaming. No dramatic resistance. She simply negotiated for a fair split of the remaining assets and made one key condition: she would move out quietly and peacefully, without dragging things out or causing drama, especially for the kids. She framed it as wanting a clean break. Wanting stability. Wanting to be the bigger person. He agreed immediately. Of course he did. He thought he'd won. What he didn't realize was that Sarah had already accepted the loss of the house. Emotionally, she'd already let it go. And once you truly let something go, you're free to do something far more dangerous than rage. You can plan. Before Sarah packed the last box. Before she handed over the keys. Before she walked out of that house for the final time, she decided she wasn't going to leave empty-handed. Not emotionally. Not symbolically. She went shopping. She bought several pounds of raw shrimp. Not frozen cocktail shrimp. Not something neat and tidy. The smelliest, cheapest, most aggressively pungent raw shrimp she could find. The kind that turns your stomach even when it's fresh. Then she went home. And she took her time. She didn't just dump it somewhere obvious. That would have been pointless. Anyone can find a bag of rotting food. This wasn't about shock. This was about endurance. She peeled the shrimp and carefully hid them throughout the house in places designed to avoid casual discovery. Inside hollow curtain rods, slid in piece by piece so they'd never be seen unless someone fully disassembled them. Tucked behind baseboards. Slipped into air vents. Hidden inside the hollow legs of certain furniture. Anywhere that air could move, but hands wouldn't naturally go. Nothing illegal. Nothing destructive. Just placement. When she was done, she cleaned up. Took out the trash. Left no trace. The house looked exactly as it always had. Then she packed the last box, locked the door behind her, and left. Sarah moved into a small but cozy apartment with her share of the money. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. It was quiet. It was clean. And most importantly, it didn't smell like betrayal. Meanwhile, back at the house, her ex-husband and his mistress moved in together like they'd won the lottery. Big house. Fresh start. No Sarah. No guilt that they couldn't rationalize away. For a little while, everything was perfect. Then the smell started. At first, it was faint. Just a weird, fishy undertone in the air. Easy to ignore. Easy to blame on something else. Maybe the trash. Maybe something in the fridge. Maybe the plumbing. They opened windows. Lit candles. Sprayed air freshener. But the smell didn't go away. It got stronger. Day by day, it crept into everything. Into the curtains. Into the furniture. Into their clothes. It wasn't a sharp, obvious stink. It was worse than that. It was persistent. Lingering. The kind of smell that makes you wrinkle your nose without immediately knowing why. They cleaned obsessively. Scrubbed surfaces. Shampooed carpets. Emptied the fridge. Checked under sinks. Washed everything that could be washed. Nothing worked. They called exterminators, convinced it had to be dead rodents in the walls. Pest control came. Inspected. Found nothing. No nests. No bodies. No explanation. The smell kept spreading. They replaced the curtains. Painted walls. Tore up sections of flooring. Thousands of dollars poured into fixes that solved nothing. Every attempt to escape it just made the mystery more infuriating. And the mistress started complaining. A lot. Fights broke out. Accusations flew. Stress piled up. The house that was supposed to be the symbol of their new life became a prison soaked in rot. Something was always wrong. Something always smelled off. Literally. Months passed. Eventually, defeated and miserable, Sarah's ex did the unthinkable. He sold the house at a loss. Took the financial hit just to get away from it. Just to breathe again. Sarah never admitted anything. Not to friends. Not to family. Not publicly. But years later, anonymous Reddit posts began surfacing. Variations of this story. Different names. Slightly different details. Same core execution. And that's how this became legend. As those Reddit posts spread, something interesting happened. People didn't just read the story and move on. They lingered. They argued about it. They dissected it. They replayed it in their heads like a perfectly executed chess match. Some people laughed. Some people winced. Some people admitted, quietly, that they wished they'd had the nerve to do something like that themselves. Because what made this story so powerful wasn't just the shrimp or the smell. It was the restraint. Sarah never confronted the mistress. Never sent a scorched earth message. Never posted receipts online. She didn't show up at the office. She didn't blow up family gatherings or try to turn the kids against him. She didn't need to. She let time and entropy do the work for her. And that's why this revenge hit harder than any screaming match ever could. There's a reason this story gets called pro-revenge instead of petty revenge, even though it's undeniably petty at heart. Pro-revenge isn't about cruelty for cruelty's sake. It's about foresight. About consequences. About setting something in motion and walking away before anyone realizes what's happening. The smell became a constant presence in their lives. It didn't just ruin the house, it seeped into the relationship itself. Every argument, every tense silence, every sleepless night carried that underlying reminder that something was wrong. That their victory was poisoned. And here's the part people don't always think about. The mistress never had the emotional history with that house that Sarah did. To her, it wasn't a shared memory of raising kids or building a life. It was supposed to be a reward. A prize. Proof that she'd won. Instead, it became the place where her affair stopped feeling romantic and started feeling gross. Literally gross. There's nothing like a persistent stench to strip the fantasy out of infidelity. Romance thrives on illusion. On secrecy. On stolen moments that feel exciting because they're hidden. But when you move into the real world together, when you're standing in a house that smells like decay no matter how much you clean, that illusion collapses. Suddenly you're not star-crossed lovers. You're two people stuck in a problem you can't solve, blaming each other for it. And blame always finds a target. Maybe she wondered if Sarah had done something. Maybe she accused him of lying about the house's condition. Maybe she thought he'd cut corners on repairs. Maybe she just resented that this was the life she'd uprooted everything for. Whatever the exact words, the dynamic shifted. The stress exposed cracks that were already there. Meanwhile, Sarah was elsewhere, rebuilding quietly. She focused on her kids. On creating a new routine. On healing. On rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried under years of compromise and gaslighting. She didn't need to know every detail of her ex's suffering to feel at peace. The revenge wasn't about watching him squirm. It was about knowing she'd reclaimed some measure of control in a situation where she'd been blindsided. That's another reason this story resonates so deeply. Cheating robs someone of agency. It rewrites their past without their consent. It makes them question their instincts, their memories, their worth. Sarah's response restored her sense of power without turning her into someone she didn't recognize. She didn't become cruel. She became precise. Of course, as with any legendary internet story, skepticism followed. Some people insisted it had to be fake. That shrimp would be discovered too quickly. That the smell couldn't possibly last that long. That it was an urban legend, exaggerated with every retelling. And to be fair, some versions probably are embellished. That's what happens when stories pass through thousands of keyboards and imaginations. Details blur. Timelines stretch. Reality gets polished into myth. But here's the thing. Enough people chimed in to say they'd seen similar things happen. Not always shrimp. Sometimes fish. Sometimes meat. Sometimes something else entirely. HVAC professionals talked about nightmare jobs where smells lingered for months because the source was hidden deep inside vents or walls. Realtors shared stories about houses that became functionally unsellable due to unexplained odors. The core idea wasn't fantasy. It was plausible. And more importantly, it was symbolic. The cheating had stunk from the beginning. Sarah just made it impossible to ignore. That symbolism is what elevated this from a clever trick to a cultural touchstone. It wasn't about property damage or legal loopholes. It was about making the emotional truth of the situation manifest in the physical world. The rot in the marriage became literal rot in the house. That's poetic justice at its finest. There's also something deeply unsettling about a problem you can't identify. Humans hate unresolved mysteries. When something smells bad and you can't find the source, it gnaws at you. It creates anxiety. It erodes your sense of safety in your own space. Home is supposed to be refuge. When it becomes hostile, everything else starts to unravel. Sarah understood that instinctively, even if she didn't articulate it that way. And then there's the aftermath. In some versions of the story, the house sat on the market for months. In others, it sold quickly but at a steep discount. In a few, the new owners eventually gutted it, tearing out walls and fixtures just to make it livable again. No matter the specifics, the outcome was the same. The house became a burden instead of a prize. The relationship didn't survive either. Whether it ended because of the smell, the stress, the guilt, or the simple reality of two people who bonded over betrayal trying to build something stable, it collapsed under its own weight. Affairs are rarely built to last, and this one had an extra layer of rot baked into it. Sarah, meanwhile, moved on. Not in the dramatic, revenge-fueled montage way people imagine, but in the slow, unglamorous way that real healing happens. Therapy. Time. New boundaries. New joys. New versions of herself that weren't defined by what she'd lost. And that's the final twist that cements this story's legacy. The revenge wasn't the end of Sarah's story. It was the punctuation mark between one chapter and the next. That's why people keep telling it. Not because it's cruel, but because it's contained. The harm doesn't spread outward endlessly. There's no collateral damage to innocence. The kids aren't dragged into it. Friends aren't weaponized. The fallout stays where it belongs, between the people who broke something and the space they thought would reward them for it. That containment matters. It's also why so many people debate whether it went too far. Some argue that it's immature. That it prolongs negativity. That the healthiest response to betrayal is always to walk away clean. And for some people, that's true. Not everyone wants or needs revenge. Not everyone would feel better afterward. But stories like this persist because they speak to a very human desire, the desire for balance. When someone cheats, especially after years of shared life, there's rarely a sense that consequences match the damage done. The cheater often moves on quickly, chasing happiness, while the betrayed partner is left picking up the pieces. This story flips that script without overt violence or public humiliation. It lets the cheater feel discomfort. Lingering, unavoidable discomfort. The kind that seeps into daily life the way betrayal seeps into memory. And maybe that's why it's remembered as the gold standard. Not because it's mean. But because it's patient. Because it trusts time. Because it understands that sometimes the most devastating response isn't confrontation or chaos, but a quiet act that echoes long after you've left the room. And as this story circulated, inspired copycats, and took on a life of its own, it became something bigger than a single act of revenge. It became a metaphor. A warning. A reminder that you can't build something clean on top of rot and expect it not to stink. And that idea, turning humiliation into quiet power, turning loss into something that lingers long after you're gone, connects more deeply than people realize to another kind of story entirely. One not about houses and marriages, but about stages, crowds, and the moment someone transforms betrayal into something explosive and undeniable. Because there's a certain point where revenge stops being about punishment and starts being about transformation. And that's where the story shifts. That's where the energy changes. That's where we move from the quiet rot of shrimp hidden in walls to something louder, brighter, and infinitely more defiant. Because now, the lights come up. The bass drops. And you're no longer just hearing a story. You're standing inside it. The room changes before you even realize it has. One moment you're thinking about a quiet house, a slow decay, the invisible consequences of betrayal lingering in the walls. The next, you're standing somewhere louder, darker, electric with anticipation. The kind of place where the air itself feels charged, where something irreversible is about to happen. This is no longer a domestic story. This is a reckoning. The crowd doesn't know it yet, but they're about to witness the exact opposite of quiet revenge. Where Sarah's justice was slow and invisible, this one is immediate, impossible to ignore, and designed to burn itself into memory. Same wound. Same betrayal. Different weapon. The lights dim. A hush ripples through the audience, that collective inhale people take when they sense something significant is about to unfold. Phones are already raised, screens glowing like fireflies in the dark. Somewhere backstage, Crown Velvet stands perfectly still, letting the noise fade into a distant hum. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Once upon a time, there was trust here. A partnership. Promises whispered in quiet rooms, plans sketched out in late-night conversations fueled by ambition and belief. Crown Velvet wasn't built alone. It was built with someone who claimed to see the vision, who said they'd be there when it mattered, who swore loyalty like it was currency. And then, just like that, the loyalty vanished. Contracts were broken. Credit was stolen. Words were twisted. What was built together was claimed by someone else as if Crown Velvet had never existed, as if the nights of doubt and sacrifice belonged to nobody. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was administrative. Polite. Smiling. Signed in ink. The kind that cuts deeper because it wears a friendly face. For a while, there was silence. Not because the pain wasn't there, but because Crown Velvet was deciding something. The same way Sarah had decided, standing in an empty house with shrimp in her hands, whether she was going to scream or plan. Silence is not surrender. Silence is compression. The bass thrums through the floor now, a low pulse that syncs with the heartbeat. The crowd cheers as the first note hits, unaware that what they're about to hear isn't just a performance. It's a message. Crown Velvet steps into the light. The outfit is immaculate. Deliberate. Every detail chosen with intention. This isn't costume, it's armor. Confidence radiates outward, not loud or desperate, but controlled. The kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention because it already owns the room. And then the voice cuts through the darkness. Clear. Sharp. Unapologetic. The opening lines don't explain anything. They don't need to. They establish dominance. They reclaim narrative. Every word is a declaration, I am still here. I was never yours to erase. The crowd reacts instantly. They feel it before they understand it. That's the power of transformation, when pain is refined into something undeniable. This isn't a plea for sympathy. This is a coronation. Because betrayal has a funny way of revealing truth. It strips away illusion. It forces choice. You either shrink under it or you alchemize it into something that can't be stolen. Sarah did it quietly, letting Rot do the talking. Crown Velvet does it loudly, turning loss into spectacle. Each verse builds on the last, layering meaning, accusation, and triumph without ever naming names. That's the elegance of it. The betrayer knows. They always do. They hear themselves in the lyrics. They recognize the moments being referenced. The private conversations transformed into public art. And there's nothing they can do about it. That's the ultimate revenge, taking what someone tried to take from you and making it bigger than they ever imagined. The chorus hits, and the crowd explodes. Hands in the air. Voices shouting words they've only just learned but already feel deeply. This is the moment where Crown Velvet stops being an individual and becomes a symbol. Of resilience. Of reclamation. Of refusing to be rewritten. Somewhere in the audience, maybe watching from a screen later, the betrayer hears it. Sees the numbers climb. Sees the comments flood in. Realizes, too late, that what they tried to bury has gone viral. Just like the smell in that house, this success is inescapable. But unlike Rot, this spreads joy. The performance doesn't dwell on the past. It acknowledges it, then moves past it with force. The message is clear, you don't get to define me by what you took. I define myself by what I built after you tried to destroy it. That's the difference between survival and dominance. And the crowd feels that shift. They're not just watching a show, they're participating in a transformation. People see their own betrayals reflected back at them. Business partners who cut corners. Lovers who lied. Friends who vanished when it mattered. Everyone carries some version of this story inside them. That's why the applause is so loud. That's why the cheers don't stop when the song ends. Because this isn't just entertainment. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for apologies that will never come. Permission to stop explaining yourself to people who already decided to misunderstand you. Permission to turn the page without asking for approval. Crown Velvet stands there, soaking it in, not the validation, but the certainty. The knowing that whatever was lost has been replaced by something stronger, something untouchable. And that's when the final realization lands. Revenge doesn't have to look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like elevation. Sometimes it looks like someone standing exactly where they were told they'd never reach, shining so brightly that the past can't cast a shadow anymore. Sarah never watched her ex react to the smell. Crown Velvet doesn't need to see the betrayer's face either. The impact exists regardless. That's the point. True power doesn't require witnesses. As the lights fade and the crowd slowly disperses, the story completes its arc. 2 betrayals. 2 responses. One quiet, one loud. Both precise. Both transformative. One left rot behind. The other built a crown from it. And somewhere between those 2 extremes lies the truth people don't always want to admit, that pain doesn't define you unless you let it sit unused. When you move it, shape it, aim it, it becomes fuel. The house is gone. The stage remains. By the time the crowd is gone and the lights have fully dimmed, what lingers isn't just the echo of music or the memory of a performance. It's something heavier. Something internal. The realization that revenge, when stripped of fantasy and theatrics, is really about reclamation. About deciding what part of the story belongs to you and refusing to hand it back. People like to imagine revenge as explosive. Screaming. Breaking things. Burning bridges in a blaze of emotion. But the most effective kind rarely looks like that. The most effective kind is deliberate. Thought out. Calm enough to be mistaken for forgiveness. Sarah understood that instinctively, even if she never articulated it. Crown Velvet learned it the hard way, through contracts and betrayal disguised as professionalism. 2 very different lives, 2 very different arenas, and yet the same core lesson played out in parallel. When something is taken from you unfairly, you are left with a choice. You can chase the thief, shouting, demanding answers, exhausting yourself trying to force accountability from someone who has already decided not to give it. Or you can redirect your energy. You can build something that makes the theft irrelevant. That second option is quieter at first. It doesn't feel satisfying right away. It doesn't scratch the immediate itch for justice. But it compounds. It grows. And eventually, it outweighs the original loss so completely that the betrayal becomes a footnote instead of a defining chapter. That's what makes these stories linger. Not the shrimp. Not the stage lights. Not even the downfall of the people who caused the pain. It's the moment the injured party stops centering the betrayer at all. Sarah didn't need to know when the smell started, or how many arguments it caused, or what breaking point finally made the house unsellable. That knowledge wasn't the reward. The reward was walking into her new life knowing that the narrative hadn't ended with her being discarded. Crown Velvet didn't need a public apology or a lawsuit victory to validate what had been lost. The validation came from the crowd, yes, but more importantly, it came from the internal shift. The moment where self-doubt gave way to certainty. Where the question stopped being, why did they do this to me, and became, what do I do with what's left? That's where power lives. And it's uncomfortable to admit, because it means acknowledging that closure doesn't come from other people. It comes from decision. From choosing not to let someone else's actions dictate the rest of your trajectory. That's also why these stories are retold so often, especially online. They function as modern myths. They reassure people that being wrong doesn't automatically mean being diminished. That patience can be sharper than rage. That creativity can be more devastating than confrontation. That there are ways to respond to betrayal that don't require you to become someone you don't recognize. Of course, not everyone should or would take the same path. Revenge isn't mandatory. Silence isn't weakness. Loud success isn't the only form of healing. These stories aren't instructions, they're illustrations. They show what's possible when pain is metabolized instead of suppressed. They show that there's a difference between moving on and being erased. And maybe that's why the shrimp story refuses to fade, no matter how many times it's reposted, questioned, or adapted. Maybe that's why the Crown Velvet moment resonates so deeply when people hear it layered into this narrative. Because at their core, they both answer the same unspoken fear. The fear that if someone betrays you and walks away, they win. These stories say otherwise. They say winning isn't about keeping the house or the credit or the spotlight. Winning is about refusing to carry the aftermath forever. It's about placing the weight back where it belongs and continuing forward lighter than before. Some people will always chase immediate vindication. Others will quietly plant something that takes time to grow. Neither approach is moral or immoral on its own. What matters is intention. Awareness. Ownership. Sarah didn't act out of blind rage. Crown Velvet didn't perform out of desperation. Both acted from clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Because once you see the truth of a situation, once you accept that someone chose themselves at your expense, you stop negotiating with illusions. You stop begging for versions of people that no longer exist. You stop waiting for fairness from those who already proved they won't offer it. You build elsewhere. You build better. And you don't look back. That's the through line tying everything together. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but transformation that leaves the past unable to follow. The house sold. The stage remains. The smell fades. The music echoes. What's left is forward motion. So whether you find yourself drawn to the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed in silence, or the defiant glow of a comeback performed under lights, remember this: the power was never in what was taken from you. It was always in what you chose to do next. And that choice, more than any shrimp, any song, any story told online, is the part no one can ever steal.